got Bob Kesling on the line. He is the longtime radio voice, Tennessee Athletics, does football, men's basketball. Was on Jefferson Pilot before that, was the TV voice. So this guy knows his SEC stuff. He's on the way to Fayetteville right now, and he gives us some of his time. Bob, appreciate your time today. How's the drive going, and where are you located?
It is a beautiful day, and I'm in Nashville right now, just taking my time and enjoying the trip over to Fayetteville.
It's different travel than usual this year, right? Would you usually be traveling with the team, and this year you get a chance to see the sights yourself?
Yeah, I would be traveling with the team in the past, but they have reduced the travel squad, and they have made sure that the radio crews, our film crews, and everybody that usually travels with the team, we have to make our own way. So, which is okay, this is what you got to do to play, and that's what we're going to do.
I'll be honest here. I mean, I've been traveling with teams for 23 years, and there have been many times where I chose to take my own car rather than get on the bus. That's just a fact. All right, so let me start this question with a statement and see how you can react to it. You're never as good, best. You're never as bad as your worst. The last 10 quarters might be Tennessee's worst, so there's no way that they play like that on Saturday against Arkansas. Do you feel that there's truth to that statement?
Well, that's interesting to think about. You would hope that Tennessee would play better than they have. The last 3 second halves, Tennessee's been outscored 64-7. So that's not going to get it done in the SEC. So they've struggled offensively. Now they play Georgia and Alabama, which were really good, but then you mix in Kentucky in there, where Tennessee got beat 34-7. So it's kind of been a head scratcher why this offense hasn't been better. Jared Garantano, the quarterback, everybody's pointing fingers at him, and that usually happens when your offense is struggling. The quarterback gets blamed, but I don't think it's all his fault. The offensive line, which was highly touted, has not played very well. They have not been able to replace the receivers they lost last year, Marquez Callaway and Juwan Jennings, both of whom are in the NFL right now. They've not had anybody really step up. Josh Palmer's had a couple of good games, but the last couple of games, the other team's defenses have figured that out. So they've been double-teaming him and say, somebody else beat us. And so far, nobody else has been able to do that. So it's really been a puzzle why this Tennessee offense has struggled. And, both of these teams lead the league in they're at the end, last in the league, I should say, in third down conversions. Mm-hmm. And so Tennessee's had a bunch of 3-and-outs, and that's put a lot of stress on the defense as well. And Arkansas is just slightly above Tennessee in their lack of production on third down. So I think that's going to be a key stat in this game Saturday night. Can neither one of these teams convert on third downs and put drives together and score some points?
It's interesting how you put it about the troubles for Tennessee's wide receivers. I saw where Jeremy Pruitt just converted a defensive back to wide receiver just to create some depth there. And, when you talk about the idea of teams not succeeding very much on third down, a lot of times that means they didn't succeed very well on first or second down, find themselves in third and long. Arkansas has had trouble establishing the run on first and second down most of the season. And I know Tennessee's strength is supposed to be the offensive line. Have they performed up to the level that's been expected in run blocking this year?
Oh, no. And probably been worse in pass blocking. Then the first two games, Tennessee didn't turn the ball over. They had very few penalties. They had no lost yardage rushing the football. So their backs were falling forward. They were able to control the clock, and they won those two games. And you thought, well, that's a good formula. They're going to get better and better. And then halftime of the Georgia game, Tennessee's up 21-17, and they're getting the ball to start the third quarter. So you're thinking, okay, take the second half kickoff, march it down the field, and you got control of this football game. But instead they turned it over, and they turned it over again, and Georgia was able to score on those turnovers, and the game got away from them. So the offensive line has not been nearly what everybody thought it was going to be. You've got Trey Smith, who's a really outstanding player, and then you got a sixth-year senior at center in Brandon Kennedy. You got a couple of tackles that were five-star recruits. They're now sophomores. And they've had some injuries there, but I still don't think that explains why they just haven't been very good and very consistent. So this has been an open date. They've had 2 weeks to kind of look themselves in the mirror a little bit, and I would hope they would play better. You would think they would after all of this, but we'll just see. It's just been a group that has not been very productive so far for Tennessee, which has been very, very surprising.
Speaking to Bob Kesling, the voice of Tennessee football here on Halftime. Bob, when you take the vibe around Jeremy Pruitt right now, and kind of like you said, it's not necessarily all Garantano's fault, and it can the blame can be poked around everywhere. But I'm just kind of curious from your standpoint. You're in the middle of Tennessee football. What's the vibe right now around Jeremy Pruitt this season? And I think we all expected, and myself included, to Tennessee to kind of make that next step and be in the upper tier and possibly compete for an SEC East championship, and just haven't been able to do so. What's the vibe around Jeremy Pruitt right now?
Well, I think people are disappointed, and I think that I think Coach Pruitt's disappointed. I know the players are disappointed. They ended last year on a 6-game winning streak. They started the season 1-4 with terrible losses to BYU, and then the inexplicable loss to Georgia State. And suddenly you're thinking, is this thing coming completely off the tracks here? And then they got a good win against South Carolina. They put together a good streak. They won their last 6 games, won the bowl game against Indiana, and they had great momentum coming into the season. And he gets a contract extension and a big raise, and everybody thinks that Tennessee football is on the way back. They win the first 2 games of the season, and now it's an 8-game winning streak and one of the longest in the country. And then suddenly the second half of the Georgia game comes around, and they just haven't been able to recover. And so I think people right now have every reason to question a little bit, can he get this thing turned around for a second straight year? And you've got Arkansas. They still got to go to Auburn. They've got to play Texas A&M, and they have Florida. So the second half of the schedule is really tough, and we'll just see how this team reacts and where they are now. But I think you're right in saying that the Tennessee fans are disappointed right now where this team is and anxious to see which way they're headed.
You brought up the tough schedule that Tennessee has coming, and Arkansas's schedule is just as tough coming up to them. And you got Florida coming up. You have LSU coming up. You got Alabama to close the year out. And I think for both sides of these teams, Arkansas and Tennessee, this is a big game this coming Saturday. It's a must-win for both sides. And I think when I say must-win, it's kind of a must-win in different scenarios and different narratives, I guess, for both sides of the team. But it's a big game for both teams this coming Saturday.
Oh, I don't think there's any questions. I thought maybe it's a bigger game for Tennessee because I think the expectations for Tennessee this year were so much higher.
Right.
I don't know how many people thought that Arkansas was going to win 5 or 6 games this year. I think they were thankful that they're winning any games. And suddenly you win 2 games early, and they look pretty good, and they had a chance to beat Auburn, probably should have beat Auburn. Well, now the expectations and the bar has been raised a little bit. But I think any win that Arkansas gets this year is kind of a bonus in the first year for Sam Pittman. For Tennessee, I think they expected to be among the challengers in the SEC East. So from that standpoint, I think this game really means a lot more to Tennessee in terms of what their pre-season expectations were and where this team might end up.
If we could reminisce just for a second, we've had a lot of our listeners this week, and some of the best SEC games in Arkansas's tenure here in the SEC has come against the Volunteers. I mean, you look back at the classics that these teams had in the late 90s, and you've seen some incredible games in the early 2000s and in the early 2010s. And I think it's safe to say that this was a great rivalry back in the 90s when Arkansas got into the SEC. And I'm kind of curious from your standpoint, because you've been around the SEC for so many years and now with Tennessee for so many years also. Arkansas, Tennessee, it has a good appeal to it of being a underrated rivalry game if it can get back to that point as it was in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, there's a lot of tradition between Tennessee and Arkansas. John Barnhill was a coach at Tennessee and at Arkansas, and of course, great athletic director there. Bowden Wyatt was at Arkansas, and then he came to Tennessee as head coach, and of course, he was a great player at Tennessee. Doug Dickey was an assistant coach. So was John Majors at Arkansas. So both of them have great ties to Arkansas, and so you go down through the years, and there's a a lot of a thread that kind of weaves in between these two schools. And Tennessee fans, of course, will never forget the '98 game when the fumble and Tennessee was able to come from nowhere to win that game and go on to win the national championship. Arkansas bounces back the next year and gets that big win. The 6 overtime game is still one of my favorite games of all time, when Casey Clausen hit Jason Witten down the middle in the 6th overtime. And they've had some classic games. And I'm glad they're both in the same league now, but I wish they'd play more often. The way the schedule is set up, and used to be they played all the time. I wish they'd play more, but I think it's a great rivalry. I really do.
Last thing here, Bob. I Arkansas baseball broadcast, and I took over for a legend, someone who you know quite well, I think, Chuck Barrett. Chuck took over football and basketball from legends across the state. You had to do the same thing from John Ward, and I have a subscription to The Athletic, so I read that piece over the summertime about the current broadcasters who replaced legends, those who people really never want to let go of. And it just hit me what that must have been like, because I know what that feels like. But I'm looking through that article, and I'm seeing that you gave John Ward a tape at one point, and he told you to instead try advertising. That's amazing.
Yeah. I was in college, and so I'm just trying to, I guess I'm a senior or something like that. And somehow I was working at the WIBK radio, and somehow they decided to start doing Lady Vol basketball. And so I got a chance to do it, and it kind of fell in my lap. And, so here I am. I'm doing SEC. I didn't view it as women's basketball. I viewed it as SEC basketball. So here I am, big-time guy, and thinking I'm all this. And so here's John Ward, this great broadcaster. So I go down, and they used to have a broadcast ramp at Stokely Athletic Center. It hung from the ceiling, and you have to walk to the back of the arena and then walk out on this ramp, and it hung right out over the floor. It was a great place to call a game. So we had done a doubleheader, and the women had played the first game, and then the men were getting to play the second game. And so I got up my courage, and he didn't know me from Adam. I took my tape down there and gave it to him and said, "Would you mind critiquing this for me to help me out a little bit?" Expecting, to get these glowing reports of how great I was as a play-by-play guy. And so I didn't hear anything from him. So about 2 weeks later, I go back to him, and same thing. We had a doubleheader, and I broadcast the women's game first. And I kind of walked up to me, and I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Ward, did you have a chance to listen to my tape?" And he said, "Yes, I did. Yes, I did." And he opens up his orange briefcase, which he always carried with him, gets my tape, and hands it back to me, and says, "Try advertising," and turned and walked away.
Wow.
So,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so it's like he didn't exactly write down the critique on paper, but his words were very succinct. In fact, "Son, you're not very good. You need to start if you want to do this, you better get better in a hurry because you're not very good." So
that's hilarious.
That was something that just stayed with me. And, the thing that was great, while I was working at WIBK Radio there in Knoxville, they got the rights to the games and this kind of stuff. And I walked on the Tennessee football team briefly and played as a freshman, and then on the freshman team. And so he needed some guy that knew knew something about football. And so I got a chance to be a spotter. And so for 15 years, I sat next to John Ward as his spotter. Wow. And I mean, what a training ground, just to figure out how to do this stuff and how to prepare and all those type things. And I would not be in this position if I hadn't have, just decided I need to sit here and figure out how to do this and learn how to be a broadcaster. And it was the greatest classroom that you could ever had. And, the more I proved that I could do stuff, the more he would let me do, post-game interviews. And I used to do the coach's show after the game and all these different things that he would allow me to do. So I'm indebted to him. I wouldn't be in this position and wouldn't have gotten the Jefferson Pilot position either without the help and guidance of John Ward. And so I really appreciate him. Another guy that Lindsey Nelson, you guys probably remember, the great Hall of Fame broadcaster. Well, he started the Vol Network back when he was a UT student. He's from Columbia, Tennessee. And then he goes off and has this great Hall of Fame career. When he retires from broadcasting, he did the Mets. Of course, everybody knows he did the Mets for all those years in Notre Dame football. But he actually finished up his career doing the San Francisco Giants. He just said he wanted to live in San Francisco for a while, and so he did the Giants games for 3 or 4 years. And then he moved back to Knoxville and lived up on Cherokee Bluff overlooking the campus. And so I was at the TV station at that time, Channel 10, and they did a little thing called Lindsay at Large, and it was kind of like an Andy Rooney type deal, 3-minute little blurb about, not about sports, but about something that goes on in Knoxville. Why is Gay Street named Gay Street and all this kind of stuff. And so I'd walk in my office every once in a while, and there would be Lindsey Nelson sitting in my office at the TV station.
Wow. And
I'd be able to sit there and pick his brain and just talk. It was marvelous. I mean, just what I learned from him, and he was just he told me one thing that I also thought was great. He said, in your life, you will get one break. Will you be ready when that break comes? Will you have worked hard? Will you be prepared that when you get that one break, that you can take advantage of it and go on and make a great career? And he would tell me that all the time. He kept saying, did you work hard today? You're ready for your break. So
that's great.
So
stuff.
I had 2 pretty good mentors right there in John Ward and Lindsey Nelson. So
you sure did.
I was very fortunate.
I appreciate you going into depth with them, and I feel we could talk with you for another 60 minutes, but we got to run. Have a great trip. Good call Saturday, and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay, guys. I'll see you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Bob Kesling, radio voice of the Tennessee Volunteers, and those are 2 wonderful mentors relationships there, huh? Oh, boy. SmackDown.
Yes, sir.
Why don't you tell them where they can get something great to eat tonight at Joe's Grill and Cantina?
It is All-American Thursday at Joe's Grill and Cantina. They've got pulled pork sandwiches, barbecue pork sandwiches, I will say, with the side for $7. Classic burger and the side for $7. Domestic long neck beers, $2.50. And then take note of it. This coming Saturday for the Arkansas-Tennessee game, half price apps and taps during the game. That's only Joe's Grill and Cantina at 3400 South 74th Street in Fort Smith, across from Harps. You can give them a call and place your order to go at 479-478-9600. That is Joe's Grill and Cantina.
Wrap it up after the break. Stay tuned.